there's no life without death. We're fighting biology with chemicals. We need to take a step back and let Mother Nature do her thing.
You really know the cycles of life and death.
We aren't at a food production issue. We produce enough food to feed 1.5 times the population in this world.
Welcome back to Recommended Daily Value. I'm your host, Tyler Woodward, and today I've had the pleasure of interviewing Ashley Armstrong, or as she's known on social media, one half of the Strong Sistas with her sister, Sarah. She is former engineering major turned regenerative agriculture farmer and is co-owner with her sister of Angel Acres, a regenerative farm down in Michigan. So in this episode, we talk about everything regenerative farming, including how it differs from conventional agriculture in terms of both what the effects are on the soil, the environment, and even how it differs in the meat, both taste and composition of the meat in terms of macronutrients and micronutrients. So it's a really interesting one. I think you guys will all enjoy it. See you in there. How's it going, everyone? Today we're here with Ashley Armstrong. How you doing today, Ashley?
I'm doing great. It is really hot here in Michigan. The sun feels really nice, but it's really hard to do farm chores when it is so humid and so hot. So otherwise, we're doing great.
That's good to hear. Hope you're staying hydrated with some adrenal cocktails.
Yes. Hydrating through raw goat milk, bone broth, orange juice, melons. Yeah. Lots of structured water in my hydration methods.
Glad to hear it. So Ashley and her sister Sarah are owners or co-owners of a regenerative farm called Angel Acres. As she's going to have to get myself a hat. And for those of you that don't know, Ashley, could you want to give like a little elevator pitch as to what a regenerative farm is?
Yeah, so I think that it's helpful to think about what the word regenerate means. What's the opposite to regenerate?
Degenerate.
Degenerate. So when you think of conventional agriculture, it's kind of degenerative, right? We're kind of using more than what we're putting back in. And so over time, that's going to catch up to us, right? We're kind of taking one step forward, two steps back, one step forward, two steps back. So we're kind of taking and extracting a lot from the land. And that's ultimately not going to sustain us in the future. And so some examples are going to be using toxic synthetic chemicals to grow our food. Unfortunately, that's going to kill a lot of the microbial universe underneath the soil. And so I kind of like to think about that as like the soil has a gut microbiome. Humans have a gut microbiome. When we take antibiotic after antibiotic after antibiotic and all of these like medications, you're like kind of destroying the microbiome balance inside your gut. Well, the same thing can happen with agriculture and synthetic chemicals. And that can really disrupt the natural microbial universe underneath the soil. And I know it's hard to see. We can't see it, right? It's underneath the grass, underneath our feet. But that topsoil is what's responsible for us producing most of our food. And if we are eroding and degrading that soil over time, at some point, we're going to reach a point in human history where it's like, all right, we don't have any soil left, so we're going to have to grow everything in the lab. So regenerative agriculture is how can we grow and produce food that works with the cycles of nature such that we are regenerating life in the soil microbiome. So we're not extracting and taking more than what we're putting back into it. And so it involves not trying to fully understand Mother Nature, because I don't think we'll ever understand how Mother Nature works. Mother Nature is beautiful. She is smarter than all of us. She will always outsmart us. But we do know that some principles work well with her. And so regenerative agriculture is all about working with those cycles of nature and still being able to produce food for humans. And so some of the examples would be the use of livestock and managing them in a way where you're moving them around and you're evenly spreading out their manure, because animal manure is rich in nutrients. It's nature's version of NPK, right? And so if we can use animal manure to spread out around the field, that's going to add nutrients back into the soil. So it all goes back to soil health and whether we are building topsoil or creating conditions such that our topsoil is eroding and it's leaving our landscapes.
Yeah. One of the most powerful videos, I'm sure you've seen it, is the White Oak Pastures video of the difference between their soil eroding and it's literally their cousin's soil eroding. So they have this big tropical storm and you see like difference between like, there's almost like a line in this river from the runoff. And the runoff from their river, I believe, is like almost crystal clear. Like it looks like pure water, just rain passing over the topsoil. And the other one looks like almost like a flood. Like you get that muddy street, like back in Michigan, like during the snow, where the entire topsoil is being pushed into this river. And that's, we can't really see the soil microbiome, but in those sorts of things, you can see the effects.
Right. Well, okay. It's actually, I'm guessing most of your audience is kind of in the bioenergetic space.
Yeah.
So you can kind of think about it like in the bioenergetic space, it's about creating an internal environment where there's optimal levels of thyroid hormone. We're creating energy well. Our stress hormones are low. Our protective sex hormones are balanced. And so it's about creating that internal environment where our body can function at its best, right? Mm-hmm. And so the same thing with soil. It's about creating the soil conditions such that we can pull nutrients from deep below and bring it to the plants when it's needed. And so the more organic matter and living material that we have in our soil microbiome, the more functions that can be turned on for our plants and produce more food.
Yeah, for sure. And I also think it's really interesting for anyone that doesn't know, every plant needs nitrogen fixing bacteria to actually pull it from the soil. So, most of these pesticides are basically antimicrobials, basically antibiotics, plant antibiotics. And you're wiping the entire, microbiome, killing the soil, really. Soil is a really living, breathing thing. And we're going to dive a lot into that. But first, how did you, what drove you to get into regenerative agriculture? I know you guys have a long history of diets coming from carnivore to strong powerlifting. But what was I need to, really get my own food source and be part of that movement?
I grew up in the suburbs and always thought, food came from the grocery store, had no idea of where our food came from, no understanding of how food was made. But I don't feel like anyone should feel bad about that, because that's just how our society breeds people and families and humans. And it's just a natural byproduct of modern living these days. But pretty soon, the way that I was living and eating kind of caught up to me. And I definitely developed some autoimmune conditions. I wish I would have had thyroid hormone blood work back then, but I don't. And so at a young age, in graduate school, I think I was around 23, I just started to crash, started feeling really lethargic, Raynaud's, and a lot of butterfly rashes, and just not feeling well, and constipation getting worse and worse, not able to really digest many foods. Just this accumulation of symptoms started to occur, kind of right at the same time. Went to a doctor and they only prescribed pharmaceuticals. And so my sister and I are let's just take our health into our own hands. And of course, when you start searching the internet, you stumble upon all these different diets. And so my sister and I have done every single extreme, literally everything. And ultimately, we did stumble upon carnivore. And I think people poo-poo it a lot, but I think that you can learn so much from that diet. And there are a lot of pros, right? For once in my life, I was eating bioavailable nutrients in the best form possible, in animal fats, in animal protein. Of course, you're going to feel different when you start doing that, coming from a plant-based approach. And so when I was plant-based before, and it was always cared for animals and cared about the environment. And then when you switch to carnivore, you're kind of oh my gosh, I'm only eating animal products. I better source it well. So that's when I learned about regenerative agriculture, and I became hooked ever since the day I've learned about it. I visited over 30 local farms the first summer that we learned about it. And I was gosh, I got to do this myself one day. I just have to. So I think I kind of stumbled on it for a reason, because I was meant to do, I have never been this happy. I've never been this fulfilled. I have never worked this hard in my life, ever. Never worked this hard. But it is just the path that I was supposed to go down. And so definitely stumbled upon it from a health perspective. And I think that that's something that Sarah and I bring into the regenerative ag space, is we are coming from a health-focused background. We are not farmers. We are first-generation farmers. And so we're kind of making these decisions based on our health standards and what we want from final products. And we kind of have an open mind, because we don't have previous farming history where we may have blinders on of certain things. And so we have certainly made a ton of mistakes, but we've also stumbled upon some interesting insights. And I think that it's just been a really cool path to merge the health side and the farming side.
funny. My sister was vegan for a number of years.
Yeah.
And she's still grossed out by certain things. Feels like it came from an animal. I don't want to eat it. And it's so funny, the disconnect between, the grocery stores and how it actually gets there.
Yeah.
It's crazy. And I just think it's so important. One of the things that I'm really looking forward to doing at some point, I haven't done it yet, is just, go hunting, maybe eventually get a farm.
Yeah.
But, and this sounds weird, I don't know how to say it in a nicer way, but like, really killing an animal for food for the first time, I think it would be a very almost like sacrilegious feeling where it's like you really know the cycles of life and death.
There is nothing like taking care of an animal from birth to death and giving that animal the best life ever. And then that animal has one bad second. And that animal is giving the ultimate sacrifice, right? It's allowing, that animal is allowing you to live on. And I think that when you understand that and understand that there's no life without death, you can kind of get a better understanding of why it is moral to eat meat, especially meat that you have raised or a farmer that you trust and know well has raised, because it's doing the least harm for the most good in terms of nourishing yourself and your family to be able to continue to live on. And I think it wasn't until I visited the farms and realized these animals are living amazing lives and they have one bad second. And that one bad second is for you. And without that, we wouldn't thrive. We wouldn't continue to be able to pursue and follow our dreams. And so realizing that it's not immoral to go through with eating meat when you can understand the cycle of life. And I don't think that the modern world has given that at a young age. We're kind of told to like fear death. We're kind of told death is a very scary thing. And a lot of the media and propaganda is all about how horrible it is to kill animals. And you see all these PETA signs everywhere. And so as just an average American, like, I don't blame you that you think it's really bad to eat meat, because that's the message that we're given. That's why I think it's so powerful to bring your kids. I don't have kids yet. One day I want to have kids, but I think we've had so many visitors and guests here, and it is so cool to watch kids interact with the farm. But I think that that's one of the best things that you can do for the next generation is bring your kids to a farm. If they spend a significant amount of time at a farm growing up, it is obvious what food they should be eating. Mm-hmm. It becomes very apparent. So there's just no question about it. And so I think that that is one of the things that we definitely want to continue with here is farm tours and having families come stay at the Airbnb that will be set up sometime in the next couple of months and get that farm experience where it's just something I wish I would have had from a young age, because if I would have had that, I don't think I would have gone down these diet trains from one diet to the next diet to the next diet to the next diet. It just would have been obvious of what to eat.
Yeah, I completely agree. It was interesting. I saw a really funny tweet the other day from PETA. It was like, don't eat fish, blah, blah, blah. Like, it's murder too. And then someone tweeted back. So like, fish can eat other fish, but I can't eat fish. And then it's like, you've been blocked by PETA, which is just absolutely hilarious. I think there are moral levels, right? The cows that are stuffed in, basically pens that are too tight for them. Like, there is immoral meat eating and, factory farming of meat. But it's not like we chose, we can choose to not eat meat and abstain from it, but we're going to suffer a major consequence of our health. It's not like we chose the evolutionary pathway where we basically require meat to be arguably healthy.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then you can choose the type of meat that you are buying, which is, exactly what you guys are supporting and doing through there.
Yeah. Someone told me one time that the original reason that we domesticated dogs was so that we could better herd livestock to manage them and then obviously kill them for food. And so when you understand the history of shepherds, we have been taking care of and then killing livestock for food for millennia. It's been a very long time that we've been doing this.
Way before podcasts were around.
Exactly.
So you mentioned, and for anyone that doesn't know, you guys have this huge health journey where started from ground zero, as you were talking about, to, where you are owning your health farm. What were the key principles that you guys came and started your farm with that you brought from that health journey that you wanted to do differently than, let's say, a typical, mom and pop farm maybe?
Yeah. So I think kind of something that is immediately obvious to a lot of people, everyone understands the word toxic chemicals, right? We're bombarded with toxic chemicals from everywhere, right? It's kind of ubiquitous in the environment these days. And so principle number one was like, let's not add to that environmental toxin load, and let's not use toxic chemicals at the farm. So since day one, we have not put any synthetic chemicals on this farm. And so that was an easy step one. And then understanding what animals you want to bring to the farm kind of determines what else you need to import. If you have ruminant animals, technically you can just feed them grass, right? But that depends on the health of your land. And if you have enough forage and grasses and legumes for those ruminants to eat. But unfortunately, if you want monogastric animals, so chickens and pigs, you have to import feed because monogastric animals cannot survive on grass alone. Chickens and pigs are like us. We are monogastric. We have a single stomach. We are not like ruminant animals. Ruminant animals have a complex 4-chamber stomach system where they are able to extract nutrients out of grass. I'm sorry, vegans, we can't do that. We simply do not have the digestive power to get nutrients out of grass. And so with chickens and pigs, they do require some imported feed in order to give them enough protein and energy to be able to grow and live. I think it's actually like kind of immoral to not give them that and make them just try to eat grass and forage just bugs. I don't think that they would grow right. And so giving them that supplemental feed, I think, is important to provide them with the nutrients that they do need. And so learning about, for example, Dr. Ray Peats and PUFAs and polyunsaturated fatty acids, and learning like, okay, for humans, the fats that we eat in our diet are then reflected in the fats inside of us. It literally makes up the fats tissue inside of our bodies. There's been, back in the early 1900s, the linoleic acid omega-6 PUFA concentration in human tissue was like 2.6, and now it's well over 20%. So changing the internal environment of our body is probably not a good idea, right? Like we're like tinkering with human adipose tissue. It's not going to end well. And so learning that about that with humans, I was like, I'm going to dive into the literature for what happens with chickens, because that was the first animal that we got. And sure enough, like there is well documented paper after paper after paper showing the type of fat in a chicken, so that's in the egg, and the fat tissue in the chicken is directly impacted by the types of fat in the chicken's diet. And so I was like, all right, well, definitely don't want soy in our feed because soy is very high in PUFA, but a ton of ingredients are high in PUFA. So safflower seed, sunflower seed, flax seed, and the list goes on. And so I was not happy with any of the feed options out in the market. And so we made our own. It's very expensive and it's very time consuming to make, but it's the product that we promised to our customers. It's the product that I want for myself that didn't exist prior. And so it fits my standards. And so made our own feed, fed that to our chickens for a while. And then we took our eggs into a nutrition lab at Michigan State University, and we got our fatty acid analysis test done on our eggs. And we were able to significantly change the fatty acid composition of our eggs based on the feed. And so that was principle number 2. And other than that, it's kind of been just like making decisions on what happened that season. I kind of had to let go of my like perfectionism type A personality with farming, because you can write out a plan and that plan surely gets thrown out the window like 3 hours later. So those were kind of the main principles, is like no toxic chemicals, and then just be very mindful of the types of fat that our monogastric animals are eating, and then mixing and blending that with the standard regenerative agriculture principles with working with nature.
Yeah. And you made all of that sound really easy. You know, I remember listening to Will Harris, who owns another farm I think I mentioned before. You know, you have an insect problem or some kind of pesticide or pest, and it's so easy to just go in, you know, spray Roundup, and, you know, your problem's gone. It's easy, and, you know, you just, who cares for a lot of the population. You as a first generation farmers, there's probably not a lot of, you know, regenerative farmer neighbors that are like, okay, you need to get a fox nearby to hunt all the raccoons. I don't know, all of the potential issues. But like, could you name like one of the bigger ones that you guys had to figure out a way to solve naturally?
Yeah, so I'll go through a few of them. First is like on the ground predators. So foxes, coyotes, livestock guardian dogs pretty much take care of that. And so we have a livestock guardian dog. His name is Cooper. And then he knocked up our other livestock guardian dog. And so then they had puppies together. So now we have 5 dogs here at the farm. And
That's
so
awesome.
between those 5 dogs, we don't have a foot predator problem. Aerial predators, that's a different story. So hawks are a big issue, and that is something that we honestly haven't figured out yet. I think that putting up fencing to better control where the chickens are, I think that that's kind of the best option. Full transparency, we don't always put that fence up because it is time consuming, and we kind of let our chickens free range. And so there's the aerial predators. Those are still a problem. And then our farm field was a row crop field. So it was used for corn and soy for a number of years. And so it's been like a mission, right? Like challenge accepted to convert that row crop field into a beautiful perennial pasture. We still have a pervasive weed problem. I don't like to use the word weed because if an animal can eat it and build muscle or produce milk, is it still a weed? No, but there are better plant species that could come up in replace of it, right? So we have not used any like sprays or anything, but what we have found that works really well is mowing it down. So at a certain time of year, the weed is going to start to outcompete grasses below it because it's taking sunlight, it's taking nutrients. And so if you like mow it at a certain time of year, that kind of stunts its growth, and then the grasses can like better come up. So some combination of mowing, but then also using the livestock and rotating the livestock to create better soil conditions such that the natural seed bed, natural prairie grasses can outcompete the weeds. That unfortunately just takes a long time. And so we're still in that process. We're at 2.5 years in. And so I think by a full 3 to 4 years, our pasture will be completely different ballgame. But yeah, we're still definitely dealing with some weeds, but thankfully goats and lamb will eat some of those. Cows are a lot pickier.
Really?
But yeah.
Is that why you'd like to change it? Just because the cows don't eat it? Or is there some sort of benefit nutritionally to the soil that like the weed doesn't have?
Well, the more like diversity that we can have on the farm with plant species, ultimately, the more livestock that we can support, and also the more nutrients in the final meat and milk product. Granted, like 75% of our field is amazing. Like the diversity has drastically changed. Like I'm really happy with it, but we still have some areas that are a little rough. And so they need animal impact. They need animal manure and urine to re-inoculate it. They need the animal probiotic to make the soil live again, right? And so it's just kind of like, 1, it looks really ugly. 2, you can't support a ton of animals on just like a monocrop area of weeds.
Yeah.
Because that's just one single nutrient. And, the topic of anti-nutrients in vegetables. So there are anti-nutrients in weeds too, but in the livestock space, they don't refer to it as anti-nutrients because they view it as beneficial. I don't think we should be calling them anti-nutrients because I think the dose makes the poison, right? And so it's really fun to watch these livestock. They know what they need intuitively. And so they'll take like one bite of this weed, but maybe they reach an amount of tannins that they intake where it's like, okay, I don't need any more of those. I got it. And then they'll go to another weed and they'll get some more anti-nutrients. And so they're never going to overdose. They're a lot smarter in their like intuition of what they need nutritionally. And so that's why you can be strategic with the weeds in your field if you are kind of doing rotational grazing, regenerative agriculture practices, because ultimately the animals can eat them if you kind of force them to, and they can extract some nutrients out of it and then produce meat and milk.
That is cool. That's very interesting to think about.
Yeah.
So it's a quote, I'm going to butcher it, but I would like to hear your thoughts on it. Is basically the essence of the quote is that the separation of plant and animal agriculture is just one of the worst things we've done as a society.
Yep.
What are your thoughts there?
Oh, 100%. And the worst part about it is there is some national law for if you want to be USDA organic for your produce, you can't mix livestock or you can't mix animal byproducts. It's maddening. It is the stupidest thing because like 100% animal manure and urine is the best nutrient.
Wait. So you're saying you can't use anything animal on, like, let's say you were to grow corn or, wheat. You can't use manure
for USDA organic. I think it's if you are above some certain income level, you're not allowed to you can't put animals on that land. So I was at something called the Soil Health Academy back in 2021, and they have this like amazing USDA organic vegetable farm. And then they have like thousands of acres of livestock. And I'm like, why aren't the pigs and chickens being mixed into the garden? And they're like, oh, we're just not allowed to. USDA doesn't allow us to. It's maddening. It's another way to control the food system, right? And unfortunately, like, so you saying like the separation, yes, that has led to kind of like specialization and the centralization of our food system, because people higher up, like big ag, like Bayer, they are able to control the inputs, and they're also able to control the price of the final product for a lot of farmers. And so they're able to squeeze people out. So they encourage this go big or go home mindset, where people have to now have thousands of acres in order to actually make it. And with regenerative agriculture, it is the exact opposite mindset, because one of the principles of regenerative agriculture is animal integration, because it is just well known that livestock integrated into the soil in a holistic management, rotationally grazed way, not confinement, and not just like letting them stay in the same area. They're rotating around. That is one of the best things that we can do for the soil, because their manure is high in NPK. Bayer doesn't want you to know that, or doesn't want you to use that, because they sell NPK synthetic inputs, right?
Which is nitrogen, potassium, and sodium, right? Sodium, potassium, right?
Yes.
Nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium.
Phosphorus.
Yes.
So there's that side, but then also like a probiotic thinking, right? So if you intake a probiotic, you're then putting a bunch of different microbial species inside your gut. Ruminants, they have this 4-chamber stomach. Can you imagine how many microbes are required in that digestive tract to break down grass and produce protein and short chain fatty acids for that animal to grow? Billions, right? Mm-hmm. And so I think the quote is, there is in 1 teaspoon of rumen fluid. So whether that's like saliva when they're eating grass or they're peeing, in 1 teaspoon, there are more microbes in that teaspoon than there are humans on this planet. Wow. And so ruminant animals, having ruminants on your land is one of the best things you can do to add life back to the soil. You're literally re-inoculating it with a ruminant probiotic, right? So of course you've got the manure, and that's going to have the NPK, but you're also adding all of these beneficial microbes back to the soil. And so with animal integration, it removes the need for these big ag companies, right? Because they can't sell you these expensive chemicals anymore. You don't need them. And so this separation is intentional. It is for the profit of a few, and it is for the complete control of our food system.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I also think, it also allows for, I would say, exploitation of the system, in the regard that, like, so I know one of the huge problems, and a lot of people are very concerned about it, is that they rely on bat poop for, I believe, nitrogen in the soil. So, you used to, and that also comes down to the fact that when you only grow, let's say, corn, you can put whatever into the soil. You can, genetically modify the corn, so you can put pesticides on it and it doesn't affect it. And, you can put all the, pesticides, but also certain, let's say, basically fertilizers to make it grow as fast as possible. So the NPK, as you said, that optimizes it for growth and not necessarily for health. But all of these things would likely kill all the livestock you have on it. So then you can, then you take it, separate the two again, and now you just fatten up the cows, which would probably, I bet you, if you were to take factory farmed, estrogen, pumped up, HGH, all that crap, it would probably have a very detrimental effect on the farm too, if they were to just be pooping, using their manure.
Yeah, that's a really good point. But if you take a step back, like, that system makes no sense, right? Millions of acres across the country are being used to grow livestock grains. Then those grains are brought to a feed mill owned by Bayer, right? That feed mill processes the grains, puts it into feed bags, and then those feed bags are transported to feedlots across the country where animals are confined into small spaces. It makes no sense.
Yeah.
There's way too much distribution. And I think that we need a lot more of like decentralization, obviously, but more like community sharing of resources and inputs into the farm.
Yeah. And I also think it's such a huge problem, and you're going to know way more about it than me. And you said it with like the difference between they won't let you have organic produce if there's any animals on it. I remember my mom was talking to a nearby farm in Jersey. They got their turkey from there this year. I've gotten my parents on like the organic, grass-fed, all that stuff. And they're like, yeah, we're not organic. She's like, we're basically organic, but you have to jump through all these extra hoops to be classified as organic. You shouldn't have to jump through these hoops to treat the soil well.
And I know that there are farmers out there, I've met a number of them that are doing organic the right way, right? But organic can also be done in a very wrong way. A lot of large organic farms can use a ton of tillage, and they can still use a number of chemicals on their land. And then on the flip side, you've got farmers doing everything the right way, but they just simply can't afford the USDA certification. I'm applying for some like government programs. It's called like the NRCS. I'm working with National Resource Conservation Center and applying through some of the programs there because there are some unique opportunities and things that you can get through that pathway. It is so time consuming to fill out this paperwork. It takes so long. For example, I called our local NRCS office back in May, and I just got a call back last week saying, hey, Ashley, I'm returning your call from a few months ago. So just, it is very hard to get these government certifications and things like that. And so unfortunately, organic, yes, it's a better option. And it's a step in the right direction, but not everyone can afford it. And it doesn't necessarily mean that it's better for the soil. There are still some degenerative organic farms for sure.
Which brings me on to one of my next questions. How does industrial agriculture destroy the soil? You mentioned no tillage, which is basically, I mean, you can literally till your soil by hand, which I would be curious how different that is from like, the machines that are just, eating the soil and throwing that up.
Yeah. So I think the biggest thing to understand is in soil, you've got your topsoil, and that's where your like plants are growing out of. And then underneath your soil, there's like a ton of nutrients available down here, right? And so a lot of roots are actually like connected down there. And these roots are kind of like the internet underneath the soil. They're sending nutrients here, sending nutrients there. Because a plant, let's say it's a watermelon plant, it's going to require a different nutrient today than it did 3 months ago, than it will 3 months from now. And so there's all this messaging going on in this like network. So think of it kind of like all of these fiber optic wires and cables in the soil. Those are very advantageous for plants. And that is kind of what allows us to grow food without a ton of chemicals, without fertilizer, because we are able to access these other nutrients, pass them from one plant to the other. We're able to better take carbon out of the soil and cycle it through. And you have better functioning water cycles, everything. Everything functions better when those cables are in place, right? Well, unfortunately, with tillage, what do you think you're doing to those cables?
Just raking them all up.
Literally wrecking them, right? So you're starting from scratch every single time. And so I know a ton of people are going to be like, well, you're getting oxygen into the soil. Well, at the price of what? At the cost of what? And there's a lot of papers showing that, let's say one farm tilled X amount this year. If they keep tilling, they have to just till and till more and more and more and more to get the same result. And then it'll require more and more chemicals. And so these things are not sustainable because what you do this year, if you're doing degenerative practices, you're going to have to do more in coming years to get the same result. And so
That's a great way to think about it.
One way is the tillage literally breaks up those vital root systems and the communication signals. It's kind of like shutting off the power for the microbial universe underneath the soil. And so you can't have high expectations for the plant to be able to grow well, right? And then the whole topic of pesticides, because CIDE, C-I-D-E, what does that mean?
Death.
Yeah, you're literally killing the microbes in the soil. And so I brought it up in the beginning of the conversation. It's very similar to what happens to humans if we use antibiotics from a young age over and over and over and over again, right? Like it's not going to lend well to a balanced gut microbiome. There's probably going to be dysbiosis. You're probably going to get leaky gut. And so a similar thing when we're constantly relying on these toxic chemicals coming in. Granted, is there a time and place for them? Just like how there can be a time and place for antibiotics for human health? Yes. But there's a huge difference between using them kind of more prescriptively in a small dose versus just constant use. And then with oat and wheat cropping, for example, a number of farmers have realized that if they spray Roundup, which has glyphosate in it, if they spray, they can dry out their crops faster and harvest 2 weeks earlier. So then they get their harvest in quicker. And so that's just another round of Roundup on the soil, killing these microbes. And these microbes are what is like keeping the soil alive. So again, there's another layer of kind of like making the soil die. When we don't have these like strong networks and pores and insects and earthworms running through the soil, creating all these pathways for water and air to go in, then the soil kind of gets flattened, right? There's not much living thing in it, and it's really flat. Flattened, it's eroded. And so when heavy rainfall comes, that's where you see a ton of erosion, where the topsoil is literally leaving us because there's nowhere for the water to go into. It just hits this flattened surface and just kind of runs off. And so what comes with that runoff are vital topsoil and all the chemicals used. And so that's why we're seeing the Gulf of Mexico and all of these like horrible algae blooms that are happening and killing all of the life in the Gulf of Mexico right off the Mississippi River of our country, right? Mississippi River runs through the corn and soy crop fields of the wonderful Midwest. And then it's just dumping it into the Gulf of Mexico. And then we see it in our waterways, in our own drinking water and things like that. So I think it comes down to kind of degrading the soil and creating conditions where Mother Nature can't survive. So we're fighting biology with chemicals. And so in these situations, you can't expect, there's no biology left. And so you have to use chemistry in order to grow food. And that's not healthy for us. It's not healthy for the environment. Yeah. And then it kind of like kills the life. And then there's also the toxicity issue. I think that's the bigger environmental issue. Carbon in the air is not a toxin. I'm sorry. We have broken carbon cycles, but there is a toxicity problem of the chemicals that are used in agriculture. Like that, I think, is the big environmental issue. It's not the cow burps. I'm sorry. It is the toxins that are now leaching into the air, into the soil, into the waterways. That's interesting to hear you say it in that regard. Yeah, I've been thinking about, I don't know if you know Pedro do Amaral Thucydides. He's a really smart dude. He's a genius, but he posted something about cigarettes and nicotine the other day, and it made me think of how, if you smoke cigarettes, you will reliably, like to a significant degree, decrease the chance that you get Parkinson's disease because of its like dopaminergic effects. No one is saying cigarettes are good for you, but a lot of the same thing is true of like pharmaceuticals, right? Where, if you take statins, you'll marginally lower your risk of getting heart disease, let's say. And you wouldn't say cigarettes are good for you the same way you wouldn't say statins are good for you, because they increase your chance of they mess you up all these other ways. And the same thing is kind of what I got from like the pesticides uses, right? Like they're not inherently bad all the time. There is a time and place for them, but they're not good. Well, and I think the biggest issue that we have is a lot of people think that they're necessary, right? Because their great grandpa did it, their grandpa did it, their dad did it, and now they do it. And it's like passed down. And it's like, no, this is how we increase our yield, and this is how we grow our corn. But what about 150 years ago? How did they produce food? Because we aren't at a food production issue. We produce enough food to feed 1.5 times the population in this world. 1.5. We don't need to maximize production anymore. Yeah. We have a food distribution and a nutrient poor food problem. Right? So now, how do we farm to work with nature? How do we farm to increase the nutrient density of our food? It's not with toxic chemicals. It's just not. Toxic chemicals are going to maximize yield. Absolutely. But at what cost? Yeah. So I know you referenced the study you guys performed earlier on the chicken feed, which they had increased much more saturated fat, much less PUFA, linoleic acid, all this, basically less seed oils, more saturated fat. Have you seen anything similar for, ruminant animals? I know pork is the same way. Yeah. So for monogastric, it's very clear the amount of PUFAs that they have in their diet, which unfortunately our entire agriculture system is centered around PUFAs. And now you're seeing the same PUFA increase in our adipose tissue. Same thing is happening with chickens and pigs. There's studies showing that in early 1900s, that omega-6 linoleic acid fatty acid composition was low, and now it's very high. In fact, I don't eat pork from confinement buildings. I don't.
Yeah.
It is very high in PUFA. Same thing with chicken fat. Like, don't use chicken fat as a cooking fat if it's from a confinement building, because it's kind of similar composition to a vegetable oil.
Yeah.
It's funny that you bring up the ruminant animals, because I've been diving into this deep. I'm working on like a what you eat series.
That's awesome.
Where I'm going to dive into all of this a lot. And actually, you can change the fatty acid composition of ruminants. It's not as extreme, because ruminants it's biohydrogenation, where some microbes in their gut are able to transform PUFAs into saturated fat. And that's awesome, right? But it turns out that there's a limit for how much they can. And if you bombard the ruminant system with PUFAs, those PUFAs pass straight through into the final product. And so this is very clear in the dairy industry, because, saturated fats are bad, right? And so we've got to spend tax dollars on studies to reduce saturated fat levels in our dairy and increase the heart healthy PUFAs, right?
Yep.
So there have been massive number of studies on increasing the heart healthy PUFAs in dairy. It kills me. It pains me. So there's actually a lot of studies, and basically seeds are able to kind of pass through this process, and they can impact the PUFA level of the final dairy product. So this is particularly relevant for goats, because dairy goats, they do require a supplemental feed. You can find 100% grass-fed cow milk in cow dairy, but you can't do that with goats, because goats have a different nutrient requirement. So they do require supplemental grain, but people are bombarding goats' digestive systems with tons of seeds. Like, for example, sunflower seeds are like a really popular thing. Well, sunflower seeds contain more omega-6s than soy. And if we're throwing sunflower seeds into dairy goats, that's going to increase the PUFA level in the final milk product, in the final cheese product. So again, it kind of goes back to thinking that humans, we are smarter than nature. And with science, we can improve the food system and we can change the final composition. Whereas, no, we need to take a step back and let Mother Nature do her thing and give these animals the conditions and the food that they're supposed to eat, and let them produce the final fatty acid composition that they're supposed to do. So the PUFA increase in ruminants isn't as severe as in monogastrics, but it's still significant.
What about other nutrients that, I would think maybe retinol you could think about, but like more so like literal minerals, because, if they're not getting them in their feed, like copper, zinc, I would think there would be a drastic decrease in the amount that actually is in the food source, which, you were talking about before how our food quality is going down in a number of ways, but specifically in the amount of nutrition that's actually in the food. And I would think that is intimately related to what's in the soil.
Absolutely. 100%. So I don't have the mineral content studies memorized, but
you're good.
I think that it's important to think about like how little we actually know about human nutrition, And so there's this one team of researchers at Duke University. His name is Dr. Stefan van Vliet. And so what he is really into right now is the idea of phytonutrients. So, you've got minerals, you've got vitamins, and then phytonutrients. It's kind of like the colors that you see in different produce, right? Like the reds in the tomatoes, the purple in the eggplant. And so when you think of phytonutrients, you think, oh, it's only in vegetables. It's only in fruit. Well, it turns out it actually shows up in significant quantities in meat and milk products if the animals are raised outside, if they're consuming diverse forage. And so there is a significant difference in the number of phytonutrients present in regeneratively grown ruminants versus just grass-fed, continuously grazed on a not diverse field versus feedlot. So the best option where the most amount of phytonutrients are going to be is in 100% grass-fed animals that are regularly rotated on diverse pastures. So that kind of goes back to your question earlier where you were like, why do you want to improve the pasture? Well, it's just going to further improve our final product in the animal, for the animal. So there's the phytonutrients, that's now well documented, that's significantly higher. And then there are other nutrients such as like vitamin E, that's significantly higher in pasture raised and 100% grass-fed animals. And then also, if those animals don't see sunlight, there's not going to be significant quantities of vitamin D in the fat of those animals. And so those are kind of like the nutrients that I have most memorized of what's improved, but I do know that there are definitely increased nutrients of other levels. I just don't have those memorized off the top of my head.
No worries. I've been very impressed so far. But yeah, I mean, there's infinite amount of stuff that you can know, so no one can know everything. On a more fun side of things, I go to Costco or Kmart, buy some eggs, and I crack it open versus the Angel Acre eggs or even other like goat meat and all that stuff. How does it differ in your eyes, like from a taste and even look perspective?
So again, it is better for you to get animal products in your diet than not to get animal products in your diet, right? And I understand that some people can simply not afford like supporting regenerative farms, but I just want to remind the audience that regenerative farmers are not rolling in dough. They're not taking bougie vacations on a yacht. It just requires a lot more time and a lot more money to raise these animals this way. So the profit margins are actually smaller in these products than they are conventional products. And so the taste is just apparent. I can't really eat other eggs anymore. I am spoiled in that like I get to eat these products every single day. I'm honestly like I'm so lucky, right? But once and I think that this is where the phytonutrients comes into play, because Dr. Stefan von Vliet kind of talks about how in other countries, the taste preferences of the people in that country prefer more pasture-based, grass-fed animals, but the taste preferences in America, we're so used to eating grain-fed ruminants that we actually like prefer grain-fed meat. But as soon as you like actually have products from a regenerative farm, the taste is so much better. So there's a huge difference between grass-fed and regenerative grass-fed. When animals are eating like diverse nutrients, that shows up in just more rich taste profile of that final product, right? And the more that animal is moving around, the more it can live outside. I don't know if you've gotten into kind of like the quantum sphere,
the quantum physics,
quantum group of like circadian biology.
Oh, a little bit, not too deep.
So I guess one thing that I have found really interesting, there's actually like papers documenting this. So, you know how water can be like dead or it can be alive and it can be like structured. Yeah. So animals that are in confinement, they're not exposed to UV light. They're not exposed to sunlight to actually structure the water in their tissues. Whereas animals raised outside, they can structure, they are exposed to those beneficial light rays where they can structure the water in their tissues. And so there's some papers showing that just the profile documenting like the life of that meat is completely different between the two. And so I think it just, once you taste a certain way of, or a certain type of animals raised in a certain way, it's really hard to go back. It really is. It is significantly better. It really is.
That's awesome. Yeah, it is. You definitely can see and taste the difference. I haven't had the privilege of getting fully regenerative eggs yet, but it's one of the things I'm looking to start sourcing in. I want to get a big freezer and start getting fully regenerative everything. But as you said, I encourage everyone to do, whatever you can, even if it's just eating, the Kmart eggs or whatever. Like, it's all animal foods is a concentration of nutrients, just trying to support, the best farm you can, which is also in turn going to support, your health in the best manner possible.
Yeah, I think that if you are like really tight on a budget, I always recommend to people get your eggs in so that you can get choline, you can get these beneficial nutrients, but don't overdo it, because you really can rack up the PUFAs with conventional eggs like very easily. 4 of our eggs contain the same amount of PUFAs in 1 conventional egg. And so if you can't afford to support regenerative farms right now, go for the leaner cuts of meat, because the fat in livestock, that's where the toxins are housed. And then, as we've discussed, the monogastric animals, that's where there's going to be high levels of PUFAs. And so if you're going to buy pork and chicken that's conventional, go for those leaner cuts. And for the beef, just when you can, try to do the 100% grass-fed, but you're going to be doing less PUFAs with ruminant meat than you are with monogastric meat.
Awesome. You mentioned a couple times, the toxins in general, but what are your thoughts on, the environmental impact of, regenerative versus conventional agriculture?
it's a really weird time to be a consumer, right? Because you have PETA and all of these like mainstream people saying how bad meat is for the environment with cow burps and things like that. And so that kind of presents the idea and allows you to accept the idea of your food being grown in a lab, because then you don't have to kill an animal, or then you don't have cow burps leading to higher levels of carbon dioxide in the environment. And so there's like all of this just misinformation being mass spread. And it's for a reason, right? Because unfortunately, big ag makes $0 when you support a regenerative farmer. They make $0 at that sale. When you buy meat from the grocery store, when you buy lab-made food, like that's where they can have intellectual property, and that's where they can have market share, and that's where they can get like money from your sale, right? And so I think that not much is talked about the environmental implications of conventional agriculture, because if it was, then they would lose control of the food system. Conventional agriculture allows for complete control of the food system. It allows for centralization, profits in few, and farmers getting barely paid anything, right? And so I think that this just really isn't talked about much at all. And instead, the fingers are just being pointed at cows. And so just some examples in a feedlot. Okay. A cow spends 75% of its life out on grass, on pasture, and then it goes to a feedlot to like finish, get fat, and then it goes to the butcher to get killed. So in a feedlot, you got a ton of cows smushed in to a small area. Imagine you are a cow in a feedlot in Texas. It's like over 100 degrees. There's flies everywhere, right? So now these feedlots are spraying insecticides to kill these flies. And so these insecticides are not only on the cows, but they're also in the air. That gets spread down to the next field. And it's like well documented that these insecticides are literally destroying the honeybee populations, right? So that is kind of just one simple example that you can actually see. And if you look it up, you will see like a lot of conventional agriculture, all of these toxic chemicals are hurting honeybees populations throughout the country. And then another example is that Gulf of Mexico. So look up the algae bloom Gulf of Mexico, and you will see how the Mississippi River is feeding our toxins down into the Gulf of Mexico. And so I think that we are literally just, conventional agriculture is just contributing to a toxicity problem. And at a certain point, the environment's not like, the soil can't support all of these toxins, and humans are just going to be bombarded with toxins, and it's not going to lead to anyone's benefit. And so with regenerative agriculture, we're working with Mother Nature, we're working with the cycle of life, we're working with biology, we're leveraging biology to get nutrients to grow food. Whereas with conventional agriculture, we're fighting biology with chemistry and using synthetic chemicals to grow our food, with not only like soil destruction, but also just increased levels of toxins for us to deal with, for other animals to deal with, and for the environment to try to figure out what to do with.
Yeah. It's very reductionist in nature, kind of like how we, treat our human bodies. X symptom, fixed symptom, problem goes away. Yeah, a couple of things come to mind though. There's estimates that we have as many cattle population in the U.S. today as there were before the huge buffalo.
Less. Yeah.
Wow. That's insane. The buffalo massacre, they killed hundreds of thousands of buffalo across the Great Plains, and there are probably less cows today in the U.S. So contributing, thinking about how that contributes. But also, and the other quantum thing that you mentioned has me really thinking about, there's so many unquantifiable things that we really don't take into consideration. Like, I've read some of Gerald Pollack's work, and I would like to read some of Gilbert Link's work. It's a little bit out of my league currently, but you got an engineering background, so maybe you can get there. And it's like, how many things can we not really track? Like talking about the Gulf of Mexico or the honeybee things, and we're well documented with it, but it's obviously not like everyone knows about that we've made these decisions. And you could also argue that's due to certain financial incentives, and people don't want you to see those things. But there's so many things that we have just kind of played with nature, and we don't really know the consequences for.
Yeah. One more example is, I just posted a study on our farm Instagram that glyphosate, which is the most abundant herbicide used across agriculture in the United States, and it's conveniently banned in other countries. Glyphosate causes seizures in earthworms. And earthworms are at least a microbial, like they're an insect that we can see. We can't see most of the microbes in the soil. Those are being killed, right? But when we are giving seizures to earthworms, earthworms are our underground livestock. Like they are creating holes and pathways for air and water to flow through. And so when we're killing off the earthworms, that's going to negatively impact the soil. That's going to negatively impact the food web beneath our feet. And so, yeah, like you said, it's hard to, I don't even know how to begin to try to quantify the consequences that we have caused, man-made, through trying to outsmart and think that we are smarter than nature.
Yeah. I have 2 last questions for you. Number 1, what is the end goal for Angel Acres? Like, what do you want to see in that farm? Let's say maybe 10 years from now. How is it going to change from day 1, 2 years ago when you guys stepped onto that farm versus what would you like to see in the future?
Yeah, I think continuing to increase just the productivity of the land, that is just going to lead to healthier food products. It's going to lead to healthier animals. And I think hopefully it can be an example of what others can do, because we will hopefully take a degraded landscape and create an ecosystem where all levels of the food chain can survive: butterflies, birds, other wildlife, our livestock. And so conversion from dead, degraded row crop field into a thriving ecosystem that is sustainable and regenerative, not degenerative. I'd love to be an example that other people can maybe follow. And then we are currently working on a new business that's a farm cooperative. And so we only have 26 acres here, so we can only produce a certain number of products. If we were to try to stuff animals here and serve more customers, that would be against our principles, right? Like, you shouldn't have this go big or go home attitude. Instead, it needs to be a partnership of small farms, everyone doing the same thing, using regenerative agriculture. And so what we're working on right now is a farm cooperative e-commerce business where products from our farm and then products from our partner farms that are like 20 minutes away. I've spent the last 5 to 6 months visiting them, meeting them, working with their families, vetting their farming practices. And I've also created now this feed distribution network where our feed that we made, low PUFA feed, is now being delivered to those farms. And so now they're doing the exact same thing that we are at our farm. And that way we're able to increase our supply with our same standards. And so our farm cooperative can hopefully be a way and a website where people can get all of their animal product needs, regeneratively raised, no BS, no chemicals, none of those medication stuff, guaranteed low PUFA, pasture raised, sunlight. And so that is something that's our current project right now, in addition to just improving the farm conditions here. But a place where people can find products that they trust and get delivered directly to their door. And then also the farm as an example of, okay, we've got millions of degraded landscape across our country. How can we then regenerate them back into our farm? And I have a lot more to learn, right? And I'm sure that there are going to be things that we're going to change in terms of our management here at the farm. But hopefully 5 to 10 years from now, we'll have a pretty good handle on what were the best things that got us to where we are. Yeah.
That is absolutely awesome. I look forward to supporting you guys. And you told us a little bit, but how can everyone, all the listeners, support both, regenerative farmers and you guys, and also, where can everyone find you?
Yeah. So I always tell people, if you have a local farmer that you trust and you love, you keep supporting him or her. They need your support. Keep buying from them. If you don't, we hope to have an option for you. So right now we're in the transition of moving from our farm website to our farm cooperative website. And so our new farm website will be nourishcooperative.com. So our farm co-op is called Nourish. So nourishcooperative.com. Our farm website is Angel Acres. I think there's a weird dash in there, but if you search in Google Angel Acres Farm,
I'll put everything in the description too.
Okay, yeah. Our website will come up. And so we will ship direct to your door. We're working on a really nice contract with FedEx where we can ship across all 50 states, even Hawaii and Alaska. So
that's awesome.
We will be an option for you for raw dairy for pet food consumption, wink, meat, milk, or all dairy products. So like milk, cheese, cream, yogurt, cottage cheese, stuff like that. And then milk, all types of meat. So cow, yak, pork, chicken, and then eggs. And maybe we'll get into produce someday. We have a few farms in our area that we really trust and love. They're organic, regenerative produce farms. And with all this appeal, BS, and all these new sprays on organic produce, I think we're going to try to venture into produce one day. But yeah, nourishcooperative.com. And then if you search in Google Angel Acres Farm, eventually all of those products will be on Nourish Cooperative, but we're kind of in this transition phase. A lot of website and tech stuff that isn't always fun.
Gotcha. Well, Ashley, I want to be respectful of your time. That was an awesome episode. Thank you so much for hopping on. And I think that's about it, everyone. So until next time, guys.
Thanks for having me.